Okay, we have a portfolio now, stocks and bonds, at 50-50. Well, what if it's not 50-50? What if it's 60-40, 70-30? So now we're looking for a concept called the efficient frontier. What are the portfolio combinations that we could make that make sense to us and where we want to take a risk-reward trade-off? So the efficient set, or the efficient frontier, is a graphical representation of a set of possible portfolios that do both things: minimize risk at a given level of return and maximize returns at a given level of risk. So the easiest way to do that is to simply show it to you graphically. And if you look at this, we have a chart on the left-hand side where our 50% 50-50 return has shown in red. So the far left-hand column is percent in stocks. 50% in stocks would equal 50% in bonds, obviously. Our risk level, our standard deviation, is 3.08. Our return is 9%. So we've graphed that in the big red dot there on the graph to the right-hand side, and you can see the bottom is portfolio risk, or standard deviation. The vertical axis is portfolio return, which is the return that we expect to get, it's expected return. So we've graphed 1 point on the graph. Well, clearly we could do this same calculation with not 50-50, but 60-40, 70-30, and so on, and that's what they've done in the table. The table shows the left-hand column being percent in stocks. If you go one up from the 50%, that's 45% in stocks, which by definition is 55% in bonds. So you have 45 in stocks, 55 in bonds. The risk level of the standard deviation goes even lower. It's 2%, and the return is 8.8%. So wait, we like that too, right? So 8.8% is your mean, and 2% is your standard deviation. So at 2% would be 6.8, would be 68% of the time, and 4.8, at 95% of the time you'll get a positive 4.8 return, and on the upside it's 8.8 plus 2 is 12.8. So 95% of the time you'll be between 4.8 and 12.8. That's pretty nice. We like that return. So maybe we'll go with 45% bonds, or 45% stocks, 55% bonds. But if we go to 40% in stocks and 60% in bonds, we have 0.9% and an 8.6% return. So that's even narrower. That return is unbelievably narrow. So we could look at it that way too. So what we looked at here is two items individually. We combined them in a portfolio and did one calculation at 50-50. Then this chart had done all the calculations for every 5% variance of that, 50-50, instead of 50-50, 45-55, 40-60, and so on. Well, that chart can be plotted, and you can see in the graph here that each one of those blue diamonds is a point in the chart. And what's interesting about this is it loops around on itself. So if you read the risk numbers here, it's 3.08 starting in the middle, 2%, 0.9%, 0.4%, wow, that's no volatility at all, to 1.4, 2.6, 3.7, just going up the chart there. You can see that the volatility at some points goes very, very small, and then at both ends gets bigger. So what we have here is a choice. Now, which one would you prefer, the top line or the bottom line? So when you look at the chart and all those dots, and you see the ones below have lower returns for the same amount of risk. Now, would you want lower returns for the same amount of risk? No. So if you look at this chart at, say, 30% in stocks, you have 1.4% in risk and 8.2% in return. Well, if you just go one above that, or one lower on the chart, 35% gives you lower risk and more return. Well, lower risk, more return sounds good. So why would I ever use stocks at 30, 25, 20, 15, 10, 5, and 0? You wouldn't. You wouldn't. It's simply, there's no reason to, because you could get a better risk-return ratio or relationship by putting some more stocks into your portfolio. So when you look at this, what we've ended up with is an efficient frontier. We want just the things at the top. As you can see, it's circled here. 100% stocks, 100% bonds. Well, you would never go 100% bonds. You might go 100% stocks, but that's a lot of volatility for the same, or for a very similar amount of return. So we kind of like to put some bonds in our portfolio too. Typically, people throw about 60% stocks and 40% bonds into a portfolio, and the reason they do is to narrow out or to smooth out the returns over time. If we looked at the portfolios with various correlations, we can see that the return here, we have 3 lines to look at. The green line is perfectly negatively correlated. The blue line is perfectly correlated, and in between that is our stocks and bonds. And our stocks and bonds are not neither perfectly correlated nor negative or negatively correlated or perfectly positively correlated. They're somewhere in between, and you can see that would bows that gives you that curved bow feeling because they're not either perfectly positively or negatively correlated. So there's risk reduction possible when there is some negative correlation to it. If there is no negative correlation, if they're positively correlated, then you can't reduce the risk. And remember, risk, we're talking about volatility. So if they move exactly together, there's no way to reduce that risk. But if they move less than exactly together, we can work on trying to reduce the risk or the volatility in the combined portfolio. Beyond that, we also talk about the efficient set for many different securities. So we consider a world with many different risk assets. We can combine the opportunity set of risk and reward combination or risk return combinations in various portfolios. In other words, what we're trying to do is diversify things that don't move together. This bond stock portfolio was perfect because it moved exactly the opposite. But if you were trying to find a stock portfolio, a lot of stocks move together in certain times, but other times they don't. So you're trying to find things that are negatively correlated but still have a positive expected return. So the efficient frontier here, you can see the minimum variance portfolio is the one with the least amount of risk, that has the greatest return for the least amount of risk, that has a minimum variance portfolio. Everything above that is the efficient frontier. Everything below that you wouldn't consider. So the efficient frontier starts with the minimum variance portfolio and moves its way up into higher and higher levels of risk on the curve. And this is straightforward math. We've done the 50-50. All you had to do is the math for the other ones to see what your combinations were. Now realize this is 2 assets in a portfolio, and it's going to get much more complicated as you add more assets. But that is the idea. The idea is to put negatively correlated assets into your portfolio, and that will smooth out your returns over time. It will give you the most amount of return you can for the least amount of risk you're going to take. So that's what we're looking for. Let's keep going with a different example moving forward.